Welcome to Family Life Forum on this beautiful, beautiful sunny day in the high desert of southeastern California. Our presentation today is entitled, the big title is Adventist Heritage of Health, Hope, and Healing. And the first part will be Visions of Health. And the second part will be From Glory to Agony. Da-dun, da-dun. Our presenter is Dr. William C. Andress, and he has multiple degrees, doctorate, PhD, MPH, MA, and RMCHES. I'll let him tell you what that means. He's a retired associate professor. Dr. Andress is an alumnus of Loma Linda University with graduate degrees in both public health and religion. He has served as a missionary to Japan, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. It was while serving as Director of Health Promotion and Wellness at Hong Kong Adventist Hospital in the 1990s that he began to ask the question, why did God give to the Adventists a unique message that was designed to bring healing, not just spiritually, but physically as well? Dr. Andress will talk about the beauty and purpose of our health message and how it integrates anecdotal historical accounts with a Christian theology of health and wellness. Welcome, Dr. Andress.
Let's open with a word of prayer this afternoon. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful that in your wisdom, way back when you created us, you saw the need to give us a day when we could come apart from our everyday activities and spend time worshiping you as our Creator, but also in fellowship with one another, with fellow believers. This afternoon, as we look at how you have led in our past history, we pray that your Spirit be in our midst, and I pray that you will guide my thoughts as I present the things that you have given me to share. In your name, amen. Okay, so this morning we left you in a rather dismal place with everybody dying off. Let me start off this afternoon by giving a little bit of a background as to how what we would perceive today as really being quackery in terms of the way medicine was practiced in this country, how this came about. Western medicine actually was derived from Greek medicine. People having trouble hearing, is it on my end? Are we okay now? Are we better? We're good? Okay. So Western medicine actually was derived out of Greek thought, as was a lot of Western philosophy. And historians say that Greek medicine was the most successful attempt in history to fuse religion, magic, and natural cures. But within Greek thinking, the body was comprised of various fluids, and keeping these fluids in balance determined whether one was going to be healthy or not. And they decided that there were 4 different primary fluids in the body. That was the blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. And they associated these different fluids with different organs of the body, but they also associated them with different elements. For example, blood was associated with air, yellow bile was associated with fire, black bile with earth, and phlegm with water. Now, those of you who have an Asian background, you might identify some significant similarities with Chinese teachings in terms of keeping these various elements in balance, the yin and the yang, and the various elements in nature determining health outcomes. So I find it rather interesting that there is a bit of similarity in terms of the roots of Oriental medicine and Western medicine. And like I mentioned this morning, the easiest of these fluids to access and to manipulate was the blood. And so there we have the doctor applying the lancet. In fact, one of the major medical journals today, it's one of the oldest medical journals. It's published in England. It's called The Lancet. And it's one of the most prestigious medical journals today. Well, it was named after that early medical instrument that every doctor carried and was primary in his treatment of illness. But to manipulate some of the other fluids, they would give you emetics that would cause you to vomit. And if that didn't get rid of enough of the fluids, they then would give you cathartics, which would cause a very watery diarrhea. And so by the time the doctor was done treating you, you were about ready to die from dehydration. And that was the practice of medicine for over 1,500 years. And we're not going to take time this morning to go into all the details as to the progression of that, but that was basic medical thought at the time that this country was founded, and it began to dissipate around the time of the Civil War. But with that in mind, I'd like to give some anecdotal stuff here that hopefully makes it a little bit more meaningful and a little bit more interesting. Anybody here ever been to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania? Oh, good. My father's family is from Philadelphia. I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia is Old Christ Church. It's one of the oldest churches in America. In fact, it may even be the oldest church to have continuous church services. They've had services there for over 300 years. And there have been renovations made throughout the years. But on the left, you have a picture of the outside of the church, and on the right, pictures of the interior. Now, Old Christ Church was a place where many of the American revolutionary figures would go to worship. We'll talk a little bit about that more. But there's a big burial plot associated with the church. There's actually a burial plot right adjacent to the church, but then there's a bigger plot that they own that's a few blocks away, and this has become a big tourist attraction in Philadelphia, Old Christ Church Cemetery. One of the reasons that it's a tourist attraction is one of the tombs in the cemetery that is right along the sidewalk, and you see this iron fence separating the cemetery from the pedestrian sidewalk outside. This is the tomb of Ben Franklin. And Ben Franklin was known for his pithy sayings, and one of his sayings was, a penny gained is a penny earned, or a penny found is a penny earned. And so people will walk by his tomb and they'll throw their pennies onto his gravestone. But another tomb that I found to be very interesting is another Benjamin. And this is the tomb of Benjamin Rush. Let me give you a little bit of information on Benjamin Rush. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. During a major epidemic of yellow fever in Philadelphia in the year 1793, he was the primary physician. Now, in 1793, Philadelphia was the capital of the United States. Before having it moved to Washington, Philadelphia was the capital for a short time, then they moved it to New York, and finally settled in Washington, D.C. In 1793, there was a major outbreak of yellow fever. At the time, there were about 30 to 32,000 inhabitants of Philadelphia. I'm told that somewhere around 4,000 or 5,000 died during this epidemic. Sort of like what happened with COVID. Those who were able to get out of the city left, and the poorer classes remained. Well, we'll give it to Benjamin Rush that he was willing to stay in the midst of this epidemic and try to treat the disease. How do you think he treated it?
Bleeding.
And drugging. He was a great believer in both bleeding and drugging. And today, medical historians feel that perhaps Benjamin Rush killed more patients than he helped. Having said that, though, Benjamin Rush is considered to be the father of American medicine. And he decided that he was going to become a teacher because he felt that by being a teacher, he would have a greater influence on the practice of medicine in the United States than anyone else. Old Christ Church Cemetery has another reason of importance to me, and that's, I don't know if where you are you can see, is there a way of just turning off these spotlights? Or if we turn them off, half the other lights will go off too. Oh, okay. Yeah, that helps a little bit. It's interesting. Back in those days, they didn't bury family members side by side. They buried them on top of one another. So in Old Christ Church Cemetery, there's actually quite a large plot of these tombstones, and they may go 5 or 6 caskets deep with the name Cadwalder on them. Now, remember I mentioned that my father's family is from Philadelphia. My middle name is Cadwalder. It was, I can never get this straight, I think it was my grandmother's mother's maiden name. Anyway, and I've been led to believe that these are some of my ancestors that are buried there. And it's very well possible because originally on my father's side, my grandmother and grandfather were Episcopalian. Old Christ Church today is an Episcopalian church, and my grandparents were married in this church. Now, back in those days, when you were a member of a particular congregation, you literally paid for the pew that you were going to sit in. And let me go to the next picture. You can see it's kind of a secluded box that you sat in. And so you would pay for a family box to worship in. And the closer you sat to the front, the more expensive the pews were. I find there's been a shift in our worship habits today. I find that usually the back fills up first. But if I go back to the previous slide, this is a plaque in one of the boxes up near the front with the name of George Washington on it. So Old Christ Church is where George Washington and his family would worship when Washington was in town. And across from his pew and one pew back, let me see if I can blow this up so you can see it better. I don't know if where you're sitting you can read that, but this insignia up here, and I'm going to go and blow it up again. It says Cadwalder 1760. The last time I was there, in the foyer of the church, they have a small gift shop and museum. And I was talking to the curator there and telling him about my particular interest in the church and how I felt that these Cadwalders might have been related to me. And he says, "Hold on, wait a minute." And he comes back with a book, a rather thick book called Generals in Blue. And it was a book about all the Union generals in the Civil War. I also found out that there's also a book called Generals in Gray, which is all about the Southern generals in the war. But he comes back with this book, and he opens it and shows me this. Where are we going? How come this is not? Let's try this. Oh, I see. Okay. Now he shows me this. And then we'll blow that up. Oh no. Is there a resemblance? He thought there was. But this was one of the Civil War generals on the Union side who was in charge of an armory in the city of Philadelphia during the Civil War. So, okay, I shared a couple of quotes from doctors back in those days. I've got a couple more quotes for this afternoon. A doctor is a man who writes prescriptions till the patient either dies or is cured by nature. And then this is one of my favorites. We lay it down as an axiom that when a nation abounds in physicians, it grows thin of people. That was kind of the feeling of many people back in those days, because they observed that oftentimes if you called for the physician and for some reason the physician couldn't get to the bedside of the patient was more likely to recover than if assisted by the physician. You know, did you ever realize that the Bible really doesn't speak highly of physicians? Remember the woman who had the bloody issue for 12 years? And it said she had spent all her money on the physicians and was not any better. And there's a few other passages in Scripture that doesn't really paint a very positive picture of physicians. Well, anyway, this morning we mentioned about the Great Awakening. And the Great Awakening began in the early 30s and moved through to the Great Disappointment. Well, what a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't realize this until I began studying this topic, is that at the same time that there was this religious revival going on in the United States, there was a deep, deep search for alternative medicine. People were beginning to recognize people die at the hands of the physicians. It's seldom that they recover. There's got to be a different way. But, you know, if you're in the medical field, you practice what you've been taught. And I'll refer to COVID. I have a very good friend, physician. In fact, he used to be my personal physician before he moved out of state. He lost his job during COVID because he challenged some of the, quote, scientific data that was being disseminated, which now we found out he was right and the science was being falsely presented to us. We'll see later why the American Medical Association was formed. That's an interesting story, and we'll get to it in a few minutes. But people are recognizing that medicine is an inexact science, and too many people are dying at the hands of the physicians. So one of the earliest alternatives was introduced by a man by the name of Samuel Thompson. And he had the philosophy of every man should be his own doctor. He felt, we don't need doctors to tell us what to do. Doctors are killing us anyway. Study for yourself. Become your own physician. So a little bit of his background. And as I go through these, I want you to notice the years of their existence, because you're going to find out that these are all contemporaries. So these movements that are beginning to emerge, they're happening simultaneously. From early childhood, Samuel Thompson had an interest in learning about plants and herbs. And by his mid-30s, he decided that he could cure the sick as well as anyone. His approach was to replace minerals, which these drugs that the doctors were using were made of, replace them with botanicals or with herbal medicine. And the favorite herb that he liked to use was lobelia. Lobelia was an emetic herb. It had the same effect as calomel. Not calomel, I'm sorry. Tartar emetic. It would cause the patient to vomit. And when he discovered this, evidently he was quite young when he discovered it, and he'd have a lot of fun going out with his friends and giving them some lobelia and telling them to take it, it would be good for them, and a short time later they'd be vomiting. And Thompson thought that was a lot of fun. Not sure his friends felt that way. Regarding mercury-laden calomel, he said the following: poison given to the sick by a person of the greatest skill will have exactly the same effect as it would if given by a fool. His approach began to appeal to people, especially to the commoner, those who had less education. They seemed to be gentler and have a better effect than the minerals used by regular practitioners. As I read about Thompson, I feel he was an entrepreneur, and he probably set up the first multi-level marketing scheme. He set up friendly societies with rights to sell his 200-plus page book, The New Guide to Health and Practices System, and he would give authorization to people who purchased his system to sell it to others. He chided medicine for its ineffective cures and high cost. Sound familiar? We don't have that problem today, do we? I was listening to a Christian radio station on my way over this morning, and they had an ad on there for a Christian alternative health insurance program, and they brought out the fact that over the last 20 years, health care in America has tripled. So he really advocated every man his own physician. And it was estimated that by 1839, 3 million Americans had adopted his system. At that time, there was certainly less than 20 million people living in America. So it had a lot of appeal. Now, about the same time, over in Europe, another Samuel Hahnemann, was beginning to develop homeopathic medicine. Notice he died the same year as Thompson. Originally, Hahnemann was an allopathic physician, a regular physician, and he became disillusioned by his inability to cure his patients through traditional means. So it wasn't only the lay people that were noticing medicine wasn't working. Physicians themselves were saying, this is the way I've been taught, but how come my patients die? And so he developed this practice, which we now know today as homeopathic medicine. Hahnemann died at the age of 88 after proving or using himself as the test for 99 different remedies. And he's the one who actually developed the term homeopathic medicine. Homeo meaning the same, and pathos meaning suffering. So in homeopathic medicine, it's believed that a sick person can be cured if given minute doses of a substance that causes similar symptoms in a healthy person. So to us who do not have a homeopathic background, this sounds like a bit of quackery, you know. But he also came up with the terminology for the opposite of homeopathic medicine would be allopathic medicine. Now, allopathic medicine is a term we use to refer to the way regular medicine is practiced in America today. If you go to Kaiser, for example, you're going to get allopathic treatment. If you go to Loma Linda, you're going to get allopathic treatment. Well, here's the way Hahnemann defined allopathic medicine. Allopathic means unlike. So homeopathic means like suffering. Allopathic means unlike suffering. And this was medicine which produces in the body an effect different from that produced by the disease. So when an allopathic doctor is treating you, he's going to give you something that has a different effect on your body than the disease itself. This came to be looked at as a derogatory term applied to those who practiced regular or heroic medicine. And Hahnemann's watchword was, each man has his own disease. He said it's ridiculous to treat every human being with a particular disease the same way. Each individual has their own physiology, and the treatment has to be adjusted according to individual needs. He developed this idea of the law of infinitesimals, which means that the more diluted the remedy, the more effective it would be. And the way homeopathic solutions are prepared, it's the same way today. It's through this process called succussions. So an example, there's a particular homeopathic medicine you want to make. You take 10 drops of water, put 1 drop of the remedy in there, and you pound it, so that 1 drop gets diluted through the whole solution. Then you take another vial with another 10 drops of water, and out of this diluted solution, you take 1 drop and put in there, and you repeat that 20 to 30 times. And then you have the solution. And so your homeopathic solution would be like, maybe in a room this size, you have 100 drops of whatever the active ingredient is. And so this whole idea was made fun of by allopathic medicine. But there was something else interesting in homeopathic medicine that caught my attention, and that is that the body is governed. Well, before I get into that, in recent years, homeopathic medicine has made a comeback. At one time, it had almost died out, but it's made a comeback. And I had a good friend who at one time worked with a lifestyle medicine clinic where they had an eclectic approach, that they didn't use just one modality, that each patient, they would diagnose the disease, and then from a wide spectrum of medical approaches, they would select what they thought was the best for this particular disease. And he was telling me that one of the remedies that they do use for certain illnesses, not every illness, but for certain illnesses, was homeopathic remedies. And he said, what they're looking at now is they discovered that hydrogen molecules have an infinitesimal amount of memory. And so I guess a lot of research now is being done on the use of hydrogen in medical terms. But I began thinking about that. If water is H2O, and if the hydrogen has an infinite amount of memory, then all you would need to do is put a little bit of a solution in there and mix it thoroughly, and the hydrogen would do its work. I know of people who have used homeopathic solutions, and they say whatever illness they had, they got well. And so if I can't speak for myself, but if homeopathic solutions work for certain diseases, that possibly is a mechanism by which it happens. But the other thing that caught my attention was that homeopaths teach that the body is governed by a non-material, quote, vital spirit upon which the remedies operate. And with that thought in mind, I found these passages from Ellen White to be quite interesting. God has endowed us with a certain amount of vital force. He has also formed us with organs suited to maintain the various functions of life, and he designs that these organs shall work together in harmony. If we carefully preserve the life force and keep the delicate mechanism of the body in order, the result is health. But if the vital force is too rapidly exhausted, the nervous system borrows power for present use from its resources of strength. And when one organ is injured, all are affected. And then that's from Ministry of Healing. Here's one from Fundamentals of Christian Education. God endowed man with so great vital force that he has withstood the accumulation of disease brought upon the race in consequence of perverted habits, and has continued for 6,000 years. This fact of itself is enough to evidence to us the strength and electrical energy that God gave to man at his creation. How did Ellen White know that there was electrical energy passing through our bodies? The electrical conduction through the nervous system wasn't discovered until many years later. It took more than 2,000 years of crime and indulgence of base passions to bring bodily disease upon the race to any great extent. If Adam at his creation had not been endowed with 20 times as much vital force as men now have, the race with their present habits of living in violation of natural law would have become extinct. So there may be, some elements of truth within some of the things that are taught by homeopaths. The homeopathic physician that was best known in America was Constantine Herring. He's known as the father of American homeopathic medicine. In 1835, he founded the first homeopathic medical school in America in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I have a sister and her family who live about 15 miles from Allentown. Notice what happened in 1844. The American Institute of Homeopathic Medicine was formed. This was the first national medical society in the United States. When the American Institute of Homeopathic Medicine was formed, there was no American Medical Association. And as a result of the formation of this society, homeopathic medicine began spreading like wildfire through America. And it became so popular that many physicians began quitting their practice and joining with the homeopathic movement. So evidently, whether it was sound or not, it was more effective than the bleeding and drugging. And this is why the AMA was founded. The American Medical Association was founded in 1847 with its primary purpose of destroying the homeopathic practitioners. We'll come back to the AMA a bit later. And so, Thompson had this medical text that told the practitioners how to use herbal remedies. Herring developed a domestic kit for mothers. And so it had these different medical solutions for different ailments. Okay, well, Hahnemann's doing his work with homeopathic medicine. We have the water cure movement. Notice again, 1799 to 1851, same time period. This was begun with Vincent Priesnitz. He was a poor Austrian farm boy. At the age of 16, he healed his broken ribs by tightly bandaging his chest with bandages that were soaked in cold water. Heard hot and cold treatment? Priesnitz is kind of the one who fell upon this idea. He opened a center to teach hydrotherapy in his hometown of Grafenberg. Wet sheets, douches, sits and foot baths were mainstays of his treatment. This movement moved to the United States in 1843. So look, all of this is happening before the day of the Great Disappointment. So these different modalities are being introduced to try to find a better way of healing those who are sick. Now, I want you to remember the name Joel Shu. A second hydrotherapy center was started the following year by Russell Troll. Remember these names, Shu and Troll. We're going to come back to them. At its peak, there were more than 200 water cure establishments in the United States. The Water Cure Journal had a readership of almost 100,000. I mean, even today, publishers would be happy if they had a readership of 100,000. And notice, 1850, another professional organization is established, this time to promote the hydrotherapy movement. Russell Troll, he eventually became the dean of the hydropathic movement, or the man who was most recognized as being associated with it. He was a man who had been trained in allopathic medicine. Before going to hydrotherapy, he had dabbled in botanics and homeopathy. His hygiene home in New Jersey became one of the most successful treatment centers in America. He became the editor of the Water Cure Journal in 1849, and later he became an officer of the American Vegetarian Society. Now, the vegetarian movement really had its roots with Sylvester Graham. Notice again the dates. These men are all contemporaries of each other. Sylvester Graham was a son of a minister, and at the age of 34, he became a minister himself. He was a strong temperance advocate. That was another movement that was gaining momentum, was temperance, prohibition of alcohol, different people speaking out against the harmful effects of tobacco. He was an advocate of infrequent sex, and by that he meant no more than once a month. He's talking about married people here, okay? So maybe some of his practices weren't too widely accepted. However, we're going to find out that John Harvey Kellogg was also a promoter of infrequent sex. Frequent exercise. Notice this. Weekly bathing. I have a book in my library by James Nix. James Nix at one time was the curator of the Ellen White Library at the General Conference. And he's written a book, I forget the title of it, but he's got many Adventist historical stories in there. And one of his stories, he talks about how James White had come home after spending 3 weeks on the road holding evangelistic meetings. So he'd been gone for 3 weeks. He gets home, and he was glad that after 3 weeks he could finally take a bath. He deemed whole grain bread to be the ideal food. He was one of the first reformers to reach large crowds through lectures. And here's an interesting side bit. Upon his death, his house was converted into a tavern. Yeah, when you go back and read some of the historical records, you find all kinds of interesting things. So, temperance movements. By 1830, alcohol consumption in the United States amounted to 3.1 gallons per person. In 1833, the first National Temperance Convention was held in Philadelphia. This was a union of medical and religious organizations. Their goal was abstinence, not moderation. And by 1855, they had been quite effective, as 13 states had instituted prohibition. And then we have in 1874 the founding of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, who Ellen White refers to on a number of occasions in her writings. So, while William Miller is proclaiming that Christ is coming in 1844, we have these alternative modalities emerging in Europe, in the United States, offering alternative treatments for healing disease. And they're gaining widespread attention because they're being more effective than what is being practiced. So it's in this milieu that Ellen White arrives on the scene. She was born in Maine. Those of you who have been Adventists for at least some time are probably aware of the childhood accident where she got struck in the face with a stone that was thrown at her by a classmate. Left her very weak, very sickly. She was forced to drop out of school with only a third-grade education. She converted to Millerism after hearing him preach in 1840 and again in 1844. Her family was disfellowshipped from the Methodist church that they attended for teaching that Christ was going to come soon. It's interesting what different churches will disfellowship their members for. Can you imagine? getting disfellowship for teaching that Christ is coming. But that's what happened to her family. And shortly after the great disappointment, she began receiving visions in December of 1844, when she was only 17 years old. So imagine the stress and the pressure she felt under. This is a day and age, she was still a child, basically. And at a time when woman's place in society was basically as a housewife and nothing more. And for God to use her and give her messages. And she talks about, in her writings, about the struggles she sometimes went through. And how difficult it was for her sometimes to share messages that God gave to her, especially when she felt that the message would not be very popular. And the White family, as we already saw this morning, was not immune to the ravages of disease and death that Americans were afflicted at that time. We already talked about her youngest of 4 boys dying in infancy. Another one of her sons died when but a teenager. Ellen White herself experienced many sicknesses. She writes about it in her autobiography, Life Sketches. Husband James died an early death from overwork and from the results of a stroke. But all these movements were gaining momentum. And then what happened in the United States in 1861? Changed the whole course of American history. Big event. What was it? The American Civil War. And now attention was no longer focused on health and healing, but trying to save the Union. The bloodiest battle of the war, and really the turning point of the war, because up until this battle, the South had won most of the battles, was the Battle of Gettysburg. Fought over the course of 3 days from July 1 to July 3, 1863. Small farming town on the just north of the Maryland border in Pennsylvania, called Gettysburg. This was not a planned battle. It started by a scouting party coming upon an advancing Southern force, and the battle just happened to take place there. This was the only battle of the Civil War fought on Northern territory. What Lee was trying to do, he wanted to make a full attack on Washington, D.C., which was the capital of the U.S. He knew that the southern part of Washington was heavily defended, both against a naval attack and against a land attack. And so his plan was to come around and come in and attack Washington from the north. And a lot of farmland out around Gettysburg. It was his plan to gather supplies for his troops and then head for Washington. The turning point of that battle was Pickett's charge on the afternoon of July 3. You read accounts of it, and you wonder, what were people thinking with their method of warfare at the time? The two armies were facing each other on 2 different ridges. There was Seminary Ridge, which I believe is the ridge where the Southern forces were, and then between them and Washington was Cemetery Ridge. And General George Meade, in charge of the Union forces, had set up his troops there to confront an assault by Lee's men. And on the afternoon of July 3, 15,000 strong, they came marching from the one ridge towards the other ridge. A mile distance separated them, open field in between. And these soldiers came marching shoulder to shoulder. And when they got within reasonable firing distance, the whole Union forces opened up. And in that assault, Pickett lost half of his men. In the entire Battle of Gettysburg, over those 3 days, 50,000 Union and Confederate men were either wounded or killed. Bloodiest battle in U.S. history. Well, why do I bring up this war? Because of this map right here. Civil War, April 1861 to April 1865. In the middle of that war, May 21st, 1863, just 6 weeks before the Battle of Gettysburg, in Battle Creek, Michigan, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was formally recognized as a denomination. That is when we became an official state-recognized church. Ellen White says that Adventism was founded in sacrifice and the work will finish in sacrifice. This church that we're part of was founded in the midst of the worst crisis our country has ever faced. And now it's 6 weeks later. I'm sorry, not 6 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks. Gotta get my math right. 6 weeks between the founding of the church and the Battle of Gettysburg. 2 weeks till the next story. Yes, question? There are evangelistic meetings being held in a small town northwest of Battle Creek called Otsego, Michigan. James White is not in the best of health. Ellen feels that it would be helpful if they would go up there to Otsego and lend encouragement to the people who are holding these meetings. Give James a few days break from his schedule. And so they go up there to spend a few days at this evangelistic meeting. It's now Friday night, the first Friday in June, 1 month before the Battle of Gettysburg. In this very house, now there are still people living in it today. They are not Adventists. And Adventists have not made a good impression on them because they keep coming and bugging them to get pictures of this house. And it disturbs them. So I took this picture without asking permission. We were just driving by. Okay? But this is in the outskirts of Otsego, Michigan. At the time, a family by the name of Hilliard was living in the house. They're gathered together for sundown worship Friday night. Ellen White is in prayer. She begins praying for her husband, that God will give him strength, that God will give him healing. And while she's praying, she's taken off into vision. And she's in vision for almost an hour. And what she was shown in that vision has come to be called today the comprehensive health vision. And in that vision, she was basically given 10 steps of healthful living. And we'll just go through these in its summary fashion. Number one, the care of health as a religious duty. I saw that it was a sacred duty to attend to our health and arouse others to their duty. All are required to do what they can to preserve healthy bodies and sound minds. Number two, the cause of disease is a violation of health laws. Many are living in violation of the laws of health and are ignorant of the relation their habits of eating, drinking, and working sustain to their health. Number three, intemperance in every form is to be shunned. And notice the specifics that she was shown here. Tobacco, in whatever form it is used, is a slow poison. It is a poison of the most deceitful and malignant kind. Same question I asked with electricity in the body. How did Ellen White know that tobacco was malignant? Science did not discover that until the 1950s. She wrote this back in the 1860s. God is displeased that his followers should become slaves to habits which ruin body and mind. Nux vomica, or strychnine, and opium have killed their millions. Mercury, calomel, and quinine have brought their amount of wretchedness. Number four, vegetarianism is the ideal diet. God gave our first parents the food he designed that the race should eat. It was contrary to his plan to have the life of any creature taken. As far as I know, at this time, Ellen White was a meat eater. And this is what? Almost 20 years after her first vision. This gives me a lot of hope. I don't have to be perfect in my Christian experience for God to use me. God can take any of us wherever we're at and use us if we'll let him. Regularity in eating habits. Indulging in eating too frequently and in too large quantities overtaxes the digestive organs and produces a feverish state of the system. The blood becomes impure and then diseases of various kinds occur. How many of you are familiar with the term intermittent fasting? Intermittent fasting. It's a big buzzword in the health field today. Usually we think of fasting as going at least 24 hours without eating. Intermittent fasting means that in the course of a day, you only have an 8-hour period in which you eat. And you decide when that 8-hour period is. So for example, let's say you had breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning. You'd have your last meal of the day at 4 o'clock. And give your body at least 16 hours to rest from digesting food. Okay? This is something that only recently has gotten medical attention. Ellen White wrote a lot about the best diet being 2 meals a day. And when you read her writings on regularity in eating, she's really describing intermittent fasting. To me, it's amazing how far ahead of her time she was. And some of the things that she wrote about are just being discovered by medical science nowadays. The role of the mind in sickness and health. This is, again, something that wasn't discovered until the 1940s. There's a class of invalids who have no real located disease. But as they believe they are dangerously diseased, they are in reality invalids. The mind is diseased, and many die who might recover of disease which exists only in the imagination. I could spend another half hour just talking about anecdotal evidence of when somebody is sick, what they think has such an impact on their recovery process. The body responds to our thoughts. Natural remedies and healing. Drugs never cure disease. Any of your medical, pharmaceutical, or pharmacological texts that medical students study in preparation for their career will tell you, by definition, a drug is a poison. So why does the doctor give you poison then when you have an ailment? Well, not all the drugs we have today are quite as bad as some of the days back in the 1800s, but the doctors are weighing, do the benefits outweigh the barriers? And if the doctor feels the benefits rank higher, they're going to recommend the drug. I get into interesting conversations with my doctors. Usually they say, okay, if that's the way you feel, we're not going to argue. That's not to say that I haven't used drugs, but they're a last resort rather than my first go-to. Personal cleanliness. I've been shown that a great amount of suffering might be saved if all would labor to prevent disease by strictly obeying the laws of health. Strict habits of cleanliness should be observed. Remember, this is at a time when if you took a bath once every 3 weeks, you were doing good. Environmental concerns. Every family that prizes health should cleanse their houses and their premises of all decaying substances. And finally, health education by the church. I saw that it was a sacred duty to attend to our health and to arouse others to their duty. At the time, total church membership is around 3,500. But over time, these health principles were condensed into programs. This is one that I worked with in Michigan. The actual first one was formulated by Weimar, called New Start. Weimar has copyrighted that, and if you want to do a New Start program, you need to get authorization from Weimar. So I was working in Michigan, and there were people in the Michigan conference who were very much interested in doing health evangelism, and they didn't want to go through all the red tape of getting a New Start permission. So they did the same program, only they called it Start New. And what it is amazing to me, though, is the timing of this. These alternative modalities that had begun to be practiced were dying out because of the Civil War. And a number of the things that were being practiced, Ellen White's shown in Vision, these need to be emphasized. As we close the first half here, I'd like to call your attention to something that maybe you didn't pick up. This morning, we talked about the Israelites leaving Egypt and going to Canaan. After the crossing of the Red Sea, what was the first message that God gave to the Israelites? It was a health message, right? Now think of this. The God of the universe. These are people who have been in slavery for 215 years. They've forgotten all about their ancestral history of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And after getting across the Red Sea, the first message God gives to them is a health message. Fast forward to the 1800s. Seventh-day Adventist Church is formulated on May 21st, 1863. After that formal organization, what is the first message God gives to his prophet? Health message. Health message. Do you think that maybe God sees some importance in the health message? Next Sabbath, we're going to conclude with the importance of the health message in our time that we're living in today. And it's centered in the Israelite experience. I think you're going to find some things that you never realized before. I didn't realize them until I did some deep study into it. But anyway, if you need to use the restroom, need to get some water, now would be the time. I'm going to switch to the second half. We've got this message of health, hope, and healing. She's shown in vision. This needs to be shared with others. We're a small group, 3,500. University Church today is larger than that. And this is 3,500 throughout the United States, not just in Michigan. So we're going to find some miracles that happened as a result of another vision that Ellen White had. So take a 3 or 4 minute break here while I get set up for the second half. Okay. Yes, I've been sipping it. Thank you. If you look at the title of the next half, we started this morning in a little bit of discouragement, and it looks like we're going to end in agony. But that's to make sure you come back next week to get, as Paul Harvey used to say, you need to come to get the rest of the story. But I think an appropriate text for this portion would be this text from Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 18. Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall. This building is what used to be the Battle Creek Sanitarium. 1900, kind of at its peak, it was one of the most well-known health institutes in America. In the mid-1800s, people would go to a hospital to die. You stayed out of the hospital. If you went there, you weren't coming out alive. People went to Battle Creek because they got well. In 1928, John Harvey Kellogg saw the completion of a 15-story tower that was added to the sixth-floor building. At the cost, I believe it was, I want to say $4 million, which was a lot of money at that time. We'll get into this in a little bit more detail next week. But what happened of significance in the United States in 1929? Great Depression. And the Great Depression led to the demise of what became known as the Temple of Health. So let's see how we got to that point. And we're going to end the day with the demise of the Kellogg era. But how did we get to the point that we see here? Remember, we mentioned that in her vision of June, beginning of June, Ellen White saw that it was his sacred duty to attend to her health and to arouse others to their duty. Notice some of these statements. After her early visions, Ellen White read some of the works of men like Larkin B. Coles, Sylvester Graham, William Alcott, who was a physician, Joel Shue, and Russell Troll. So Ellen White had writings from these men who were introducing these alternative modalities of healing in her library. But she said she never read them until she had these visions. In 1864, so this is the next year, she visited Caleb Jackson's hydrotherapy spa in Danville, New York. And later God showed her that at the time, this was the best health institute in the United States. And so when James had his stroke in the fall of 1865, she took him to Danville for his recovery. There were certain things that were being practiced, though, that she felt were not in harmony with Christian principles. And so she left the institution. They were on their way back to Battle Creek when they decided to stop in New York for a few days. It's now Christmas Day, 1865. And Ellen White is given her second major health vision. in which inspiration was given to have an institution in which to teach health principles. The fledgling Adventist church, 3,500 members approximately, they found a piece of property that they thought would be appropriate to start a health institution on. It was for sale for $11,000. Now, that was a lot of money back in those days. John Loughborough, one of the members of the Battle Creek congregation, was given the responsibility of being fundraiser. Later on, John Loughborough would write a book that I would encourage all of you to get. Reprints are available. You'd have to go online to find out where they're available. I've had this in my library for years now. I'm not sure if it's available through Pacific Press or not, but the name of the book is The Great Second Advent Movement by John Loughborough. He wrote this in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's the first recorded history of the Advent movement. And some of the anecdotal stories that I've shared with you come from this book. So John Loughborough is given the responsibility. He starts walking down the streets of Battle Creek, a lot of Adventists living in Battle Creek at this time, knocking on doors, asking people to make a pledge towards this health institution. He finally comes to the door of John Preston Kellogg. John Preston Kellogg is a broom maker. In fact, he owns the only broom factory between Chicago and Detroit. And Battle Creek's almost directly in the middle between those two. Today, driving by car probably take you 2.5 to 3 hours to get to either one of those cities from Battle Creek, and that's driving on the freeway. So it gives you an idea of how he probably had a fairly lucrative business. Loughborough explains the need to him. Mr. Kellogg asks him, so how much have you raised so far? To which Loughborough replies, if you make a donation, it will be the first. Mr. Kellogg asks for the subscription pad. He writes down his name, and next to it he puts down $500. There might have been a number of thoughts going through his mind at the time. If you look at these two gravestones, one on the left says Ella Kellogg, born February 28, 1856, died July 29, 1858. Doesn't seem like she lived very long. She died because she was misdiagnosed and mistreated by her physicians. She had an ailment that would have been readily curable. Or look at this tombstone next to it, Mary Kellogg, March 31, 1843, March 14, 1858, teenager. John Preston Kellogg's first wife. When Loughborough came to him, he might have been thinking about the passage of his family members. Or he might have been thinking about the copious bouts of diarrhea he had after being treated for an eye ailment with copious amounts of calomel. And how he suffered the swollen tongue and the drooling. I'm sure some of these thoughts must have been going through his mind. Well, you can imagine, oh, by the way, Kellogg worked about 14 hours a day in his broom factory, making 75 cents a day. $500, that was 2 years' salary. Did I mention he had 14 children to feed? Come on, folks, you do the math. It does not add up. I cannot find any record where any of his children starved. I cannot find where Kellogg went through hardship. Recently, our church has been involved in a fundraising project. We've been involved in it for a long time. Many years ago, your pastor probably remembers when we met in a room in the annex to the university church, the Japanese congregation there. And then we left there and met in a warehouse for a while, and finally we got a church that was for sale on property, but we've outgrown it. It's too small for us. And so recently we were told that the process is going on. The city has given us the go-ahead to initiate submission of plans, etc. And we were told that based on everything that we're hoping to do, it's going to cost about $7.5 million. We had in reserve $2 million from sale of a property that initially we were going to build on, and then the city wouldn't let us build there because they found some Indian ruins on the property. So we sold that property and had about $2 million from it. We found out that we could borrow up to $2.5 million from the conference. So that leaves us, $3 million short. And we were told that in order to start building, we needed $6 million in hand. Okay. So back the end of October, somebody in our church said, I will give up to $1 million in matching funds for whatever you raise, up to $1 million in matching funds for whatever you raise by the end of the year. Now, over the course of 10 years, we had raised, by donations, etc., about $600,000. And this person is going to match up to $1 million what we raise in 3 months. And there was a lot of skepticism, including yours truly. By Christmas, we had raised almost $1,100,000. The same God that started the work back in the 1800s is still working with us today if we will but step out in faith. So you can imagine, Loughborough is all excited. He's just gotten this big donation. So he runs across the street to the White House. Not the one in Washington, D.C. This is the one in Battle Creek, where James and Alan live. It's been remodeled, but this is the exact house that Loughborough knocked on. In Battle Creek, if you ever go there, you need to go to the Adventist Heritage Village. They give tours, and they've tried to collect buildings from historical buildings from the Adventist past, and this is one of them. On the second story, facing us, there are 2 bedrooms. In the bedroom to the right, that is the bedroom in which Ellen White had a great controversy vision. And I tell you, when you go through there on a tour and you're in that room, you feel like you're on holy ground. So Loughborough tells Ellen the good news. You know, I just came from John Preston Kellogg's home. He's excited about this building that we're going to get to teach what you saw in vision. Can you add to the donation page? Ellen takes the subscription sheet, writes down her name and her husband's name, James and Ellen White, $500. Out of those 2 donations, that was the catalyst to get other people involved. Now remember, she had this vision, Christmas Day, 1865. Cost to purchase this farm with buildings on it was $11,000. They opened its doors to receive patients on September 5, 1866. Less than a year after Ellen White had the vision. Staff was made up of 2 physicians, 1 nurse, 3 or 4 helpers, 2 bath attendants. Now we get to the good part. All-inclusive rates for 1 week, $5 to $7. Well, remember, John Harvey Kellogg, in his business, he's only making 75 cents a day. So this is about a week's wages. Between 1866 and 1876, they treated 2,000 patients. Of those patients, 10 died, an average of 1 a year. Now remember, this is at a time when people went to the hospital because they were dying, not in order to get well. So you can imagine what happened. Good news spreads. And it got to the point where the building wasn't big enough to house the patients. They began housing patients in staff workers' homes. Some people felt, well, we need to expand. We're too small. There were others, including James and Ellen White, that said, we can't expand until we have workers that have been trained to teach what God showed me in vision. And so this is where John Harvey Kellogg comes in. As a young man, after witnessing a friend bled on the kitchen table, he declared he would become anything in life but a doctor. However, he developed an interest in health by sitting type at the Review and Herald Publishing House. The Review and Herald was publishing things by Shue and Troll and Sylvester Graham and some of these other health reformers. And Kellogg, as he's setting the type, he'd be reading what he was setting. In the fall of 1872, he studied at Troll's Hygiotherapeutic College. Now remember, Troll was the dean of the hydrotherapy movement. He then spent a year at the University of Michigan before getting his medical degree from Bellevue Hospital Medical College in New York. Upon graduation, he was invited to be the medical director of the Western Health Reform Institute at the age of 24. I don't know of any hospital CEO under the age of 30. Well, under the leadership of John Harvey Kellogg, Battle Creek became world-renowned. And Kellogg was one who was eclectic in his approach. He believed in natural remedies, but he also believed that there was a place for allopathic medicine. And he would give health lectures in the auditorium of the hospital. He said that the sanitarium was to be a place for education, not just healing. Kellogg actually was the one who coined the term sanitarium. You know, our hospitals used to be called sanitariums. They're not called that anymore. In Kellogg's day, a sanatorium was a place where TB patients were treated. So Kellogg did a play on words on that after the germ theory of disease was discovered. And he changed the name of the Western Health Reform Institute to Battle Creek Sanitarium and Hospital because he believed that a hospital should be a place where sanitary practices should be implemented. Notice what he accomplished in his lifetime. I mean, I look at this and I think, you know, there's a modern day John Harvey Kellogg. He lives not too far from here, and he's just now retiring. He's just finishing up a couple of decades, I think, of being president of Loma Linda University Medical Center, and that's Dr. Richard Hart. When I see the things that Dr. Richard Hart does, it makes me think of John Harvey Kellogg. Look at this. He was an administrator, surgeon, author, lecturer, nutritionist, health reformer, inventor. During his lifetime, he performed 22,000 operations. His area of specialty was the GI tract. So he knew a lot about nutrition because the digestive system was his area of expertise. By the way, his last operation was done at the age of 88. He published nearly 50 books, and we have just a few of them up there. One of his books, The New Dietetics, an author of the New York Evening Post said that, in his opinion, the book qualified Kellogg for a Nobel Prize as a lifesaver. He gave over 5,000 lectures. He discovered a number of food items, including cornflakes, peanut butter, and various meat analogs. During his tenure as the CEO of Battle Creek Sanitarium, here's a number of individuals. Most of these you've probably never heard of, who were either guests or patients at the Battle Creek San. You know, people like Henry Ford, James Buick, John D. Rockefeller, Edgar Welsh, J.C. Penney, Montgomery Ward, George Bernard Shaw, Dale Carnegie. Bill Tilden, he was a tennis player. Johnny Weissmuller, first Tarzan actor, but before that he was an Olympic gold medalist swimmer. There was a particular race that he was trying to break his own record in, and he had been working on this for an extensive period of time, at least months, if not years, and didn't seem to be able to make any progress. Kellogg put him on a vegetarian diet, and shortly thereafter he broke his record. William Howard Taft, President of the United States, was patient number 100,000. William Jennings Bryan, another politician. Ivan Pavlov, Charles and William Mayo, the founders of the Mayo Clinic. Thomas Edison, Admiral Richard Byrd, explorer to the South Pole. Kellogg basically designed the menu that his men were to eat on that expedition to the South Pole. Clara Barton, Amelia Earhart, she gave him a private plane tour of Battle Creek. So, you know, we're talking about a man who rubbed shoulders with the who's who of America. Also an inventor. He invented or modified and improved numerous devices, including some to increase blood circulation, improve digestion, aid in weight loss. He was the first to develop vibrating belts for spot weight reduction. Those of you who are old enough to remember the older gyms, they had those belts that, well, you can blame those on Kellogg. He perfected the universal dynamometer for measuring grip strength. He invented a menthol inhaler, tanning booths, a mechanical horse that was designed to give some aerobic exercise. It was in the shape of a horse with a saddle, but you pedaled it like on a bicycle. Vibrating chair, I don't know what the purpose of that was. But various types of exercise equipment, including a rowing machine. And here we have a picture of a couple of these pieces of equipment. That's on the left is the mechanical horse, and then in the upper right is the rowing machine. Now I'd like to show you a picture of this rowing machine in use. And I would like you to look at the lower left-hand corner. Let's see if we can blow that up a little bit. Right-hand corner. That's about as large as we're going to get it. Can any of you read any of the lettering on it? It starts TITA, and we can't see the rest of it. That says Titanic. The Titanic was the first ocean-going vessel that had a gymnasium on it, and Kellogg's exercise equipment was on it. Kellogg was very particular about not so much his own diet, but promoting dietary principles. He was a very strong advocate of a vegetarian diet. He did not always get along with Adventist ministers because many of them at the time were still meat eaters. At the time, meat was very unsanitary to eat. And a book came out called The Jungle, written by Sinclair, and in which it decried the practices of the meat industry. The way meat was processed was very unsanitary. And so Sinclair had come out with this book. It was a novel, but it decried the practices in the meat industry. As a result of that book, the Department of Agriculture was formulated. So the initial reason that the U.S. Department of Agriculture was formulated was to protect the meat industry. Well, in one of the papers, there came a jingle promoting the eating of meat. And it went like this. Methuselah ate what he found on his plate, and never, as people do now, did he note the amounts of the calorie count. He ate it because it was chow. He wasn't disturbed as at dinner he sat devouring a roast or a pie to think it was lacking in granular fat or a couple of vitamins shy. He cheerfully chewed every species of food, untroubled by worries or fears, lest his health might be hurt by some fancy dessert, and he lived over 900 years. Well, Kellogg couldn't take that. And he had dabbled in poetry, so he sent a response. And here's what he wrote. What Methuselah ate was not on a plate, for plates were not yet invented. Being discreet, he ate paradise meat, and thus old age prevented. For paradise meat was delicious to eat, and kept him in finest condition, and 'twas hung on trees, and not made to please the deadly livestock commission. Well, being in the field of public health, and not always taking care of my own health, as was the case with Kellogg, here's one of my favorite quotes from him. I am under no obligation to practice what I preach. My business is to preach, and I really haven't time to practice. I'm putting out fires. That is my business. I belong to the fire department, and I haven't time to look after my own health. I'm looking after other people's health, and my own health has to take the best chance it can. Somewhere along the line, Kellogg felt that these letters from Ellen White were getting too personal, and he didn't like some of the counsel that she was giving, especially after the Battle Creek sanitarium burned to the ground. He got word of it when he was in Chicago, and on his way back to Battle Creek on the train, he drew up blueprints for a new hospital. Ellen White said to rebuild small. That was not within Kellogg's plans. He knew what an impact the institution had been making, and he was going to come back grander and more glorious. And to raise money, he came out with a book called The Living Temple, which Ellen White indicated had teachings in it that were not in harmony with the Bible. Kellogg decided to rewrite portions of the book, but he was told that his rewrite still expressed the sentiments that were contrary to Scripture. Going into that whole issue is a whole different story, but it was at that time that Ellen White described what was happening in Battle Creek as the alpha of apostasy. And she said that she saw shortly the Omega would follow, and she trembled for God's people. And so, if you want to understand the Omega, you need to go back and read it. It's in Selected Messages. I'll get the exact pages for next week. She goes into quite some detail about what was going on in Battle Creek and her warnings about what would take place in the Omega. Because by understanding that, we can understand what is going on in both our world and within our church today. Anyway, in 1907, Kellogg hadn't been attending church for some time. The church board of the Battle Creek Sand decided to remove his name from fellowship. Kellogg did not dispute it, but prior to being disfellowshipped, he had had a meeting, a couple-hour meetings with some of the board members as they were trying to understand where Kellogg stood theologically on several issues. By this time, Kellogg no longer trusted church leadership, and so in that meeting, he had his personal secretary there with him to take down notes. Those notes comprise 160 pages of 8.5 by 11 paper. You can go on the internet and print out that whole discussion. But around the same time, Kellogg manipulated the bylaws of the sanitarium's constitution and wrested control of the sanitarium from the church. Like I said earlier, he built these 2 towers. They were completed in 1928. 1929, the Great Depression broke out. Even the wealthy could no longer afford to go to Battle Creek. And I think it was 1933, he declared bankruptcy. Today, you can have tours of the building. It's no longer owned by the Seventh-day Adventists. It's now a government storage depository. I understand that a lot of Homeland Security records are kept there, but they have kept a certain portion of the building remodeled as it was back in the early 1930s. And occasionally they have big dinners in the banquet hall. Kellogg didn't cut any corners in making this the most elaborate building in Battle Creek. And you have to make reservations to get the tour because it is a government facility now. And this is the front. And the city of Battle Creek has put a placard in front of it designating it as a historic site. And so, 130 years ago, Battle Creek really made an impress on that community. Unfortunately, the Adventist Church no longer has a health institution in that area. So, what about the ending of Kellogg's life? Some final thoughts. He died on December 14. By the way, December 14 is also the day that George Washington died. He was 91 years of age. And he's buried in a family plot there in Oak Hill Cemetery, same cemetery where the Whites are buried. One of his students was Harry Miller. Harry Miller is more commonly known as the China Doctor. During his ministry, he started or helped to start over 20 hospitals in Asia, most of them in China. The last one he started was when he was in his early 90s, and that was the hospital that I had the privilege of working in Hong Kong. It's that round building surrounded by high-rise apartments. Miller was back in the States on a furlough, and he happened to run into his old teacher. Kellogg was one of Miller's teachers when he went through medical training. He happened to run into Kellogg. And Kellogg said to Dr. Miller, he said, I understand that you've been given a bruising by the brethren. They've hit you pretty hard. And Miller admitted, yeah, there had been some conflict. And Kellogg's words to him were, don't rebel. And whatever you do, never leave the church. And don't give up on the spirit of prophecy. I hope Kellogg's in heaven, because I would love to sit down and talk with him about his experiences. And the Adventist health work would not be what it is today without the guidance that Kellogg gave it in its beginning years. But God in his plans, when something doesn't work out, he's got something better. And that's where we pick up next week. You no longer can take a picture like this. There's now a high-rise next to it. But let's close with this thought from 2 Chronicles. Believe in the Lord your God, so shall you be established. Believe his prophets, so shall you prosper. Okay, I know some of you have some questions. I don't know I have answers, but we'll try. I know there's one over here.
Concerning the old Christ Church, you said that they've had services there for over 300 years. Okay. I thought our country's going to celebrate its 250th birthday in July.
So that would mean that the birth of our country was in 1776, right?
Yes.
So that means
preceded?
That means that Old Christ Church was built before that, before the Revolutionary War.
Okay.
Remember, the Pilgrims came here in 1620.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were various cities that were being developed.
Wow. Okay. I
So
kind of had a thought that everything was very
built
primitive.
in the early 1700s.
Okay. I don't know why. I was just thinking everything was very primitive. You know, we had teepees and.
Yeah, well, like I said, they've done remodeling on it.
Okay.
So I'm sure someplace in the church they have pictures of the original, but that building or a church building has been there for over 300 years.
Okay.
And as I understand it, it's the oldest church in America that has had continuous services.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I'm terrible at history and even worse at math. Thank you for making it very interesting. Thank you.
I'm kind of a trivia buff, so when I see these things, I start making connections.
You know, when Kellogg said he wasn't going to be a doctor, I got the scriptures where God says you can plan your plan, but he's going to take it and direct it. You know, so he might have said he wasn't going to be a doctor, but the Lord said, you're going to be a doctor.
Yeah. You know, the Whites contributed heavily towards his medical or scholastic expenses.
Oh, that's what I was wondering. How he got his money.
Yeah. In her later years, when Kellogg is wavering, Ellen White frequently, when she writes to him, she says, "I would write to you as a mother writes to her son." And, well, when Kellogg is beginning to have these thoughts of going astray, Ellen White's over in Australia. You know, after the 1888 conference, there were a lot of the brethren who felt Ellen White was a thorn in their side. And no internet in those days, no high-speed jet planes. We'll send her on a slow boat to Australia, and that'll solve our problems. And she comes back to the United States, and Battle Creek is in disarray. Yes.
I have two questions. A movie was made called The Road to Wellness about Kellogg and the sanitarium. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, I've watched it.
Yeah, I wanted to get your impression on that. And then I had another question.
Okay. Of course, it was produced by Hollywood. And so Hollywood, in order to make things appealing, they have to twist the facts a little bit. Well, on this one, they twisted them a lot. There is an element of truth in there, but you're not going to be able to decipher the truth from the fiction unless you've studied deeply into what the truth was. You know, the fact that Battle Creek had become the cereal capital, probably of the world, and that at one time, I don't know, there was something like 300 different cereal companies in it. The conflict in there with Post. The foundation of the story is true. But, you know, there's one section in there where they have Kellogg giving a lecture, and he has one of his assistants bring in some manure from the barn, and he shows that there's more bacteria in the steak than there is in the manure. That is true. That was one thing that in one of his lectures Kellogg did. But a lot about the deviant son and the facts surrounding the fire that destroyed the sand, that's all fictionalized.
The other question I had at this point is, it seems that Sylvester Graham and possibly Kellogg and Ellen White had some ideas about that meat would give you, it would excite your animal propensities.
Yeah.
In fact, I think Graham even developed his crackers to find a vegetarian alternative. But could you say a word about Ellen White's theory of animal propensities and how they're excited by either flesh foods or maybe ovo-lacto or
Yeah,
and did Kellogg go along with that theory?
Kellogg definitely went along with that theory. I have to be careful in terms of the words I use here. I think in some of Ellen White's statements, you would even come to this conclusion that not every single word that she wrote down was an inspired word. We have to, I mean, well, for example, some of her own struggles with eating meat. You know, that the moment God showed her vegetarianism as the ideal diet, she didn't, you know, become a vegetarian within 24 hours. Maybe I can go back to this slide that I skipped over this morning, because I think this might illustrate best the point that I'm going to try to make here. Okay, so, in her day, remember, malaria was the most prevalent contagious disease in America at the time. And it was believed that it was caused by bad night air. Okay? And like I mentioned, malaria means bad air. Okay? So this is in Selected Messages. This was very shortly after receiving her comprehensive health vision, that she writes the following: dwellings, if possible, should be built upon high and dry ground. If a house be built where water settles around it, remaining for a time, and then drying away, a poisonous miasma arises, and fever and ague, sore throat, lung diseases, and fevers will be the result. So when I read this, to me it sounds like Ellen White is stating the commonly held belief at the time. I mean, this is what medicine taught. Later on, when she writes The Ministry of Healing, she again makes a statement about this, but her wording is a bit different. Said, so far as possible, all buildings intended for human habitation should be placed on high, well-drained ground. This will ensure a dry site and prevent the danger of disease from dampness and miasma. The matter is often too lightly regarded. Continuous ill health, serious dampness, and many deaths result from the dampness and malaria of low-lying, ill-drained situations. So in the previous statement, to me it seems like it's the miasma that is causing the disease. In the later statement, it's clear to me that she's saying it's in these environments where we see these diseases prevalent. Okay? So I think, especially when it comes to health practices, I think some of her writings reflect some of the thinking of the day. But I don't have a good answer, because I've asked myself these questions, and I don't know of anything, at least that I've come across, in the scientific literature that kind of supports that idea. I do believe that animal propensities are strengthened by a meat diet. Now, whether or not she means by that different sexual desires, I don't know that I could find something for that. But I know here in California, a number of years ago, I forget which prison it was, but there was an Adventist working at a state prison, and he convinced the warden to change the diet to a vegetarian diet. And within a few months, they found that the level of fighting in the prison, the level of aggressive behavior, the violent incidents, all decreased. And the only thing they had done differently was change the diet. And then something like the ACLU got involved in. They didn't care about what the diet was doing. They were more concerned about restricting prisoners from being able to eat what they were used to. So I do think there is evidence that, well, let me take it in a different direction. I think there is evidence that a meat-based diet increases aggressiveness. That's why our military personnel are fed a high animal diet. That's why before American football games, professional football games, the meal that they eat is basically all animal food, okay, to increase that aggressiveness. But I don't know if anybody has really studied, and I don't know how you would set up a study to look at the relationship between diet and sexual desire. Another area that I struggle with is, some of his statements about coffee drinking. And yet if you go to the scientific literature, there's a lot of benefits related to coffee. So there are these areas that I consider to be gray areas. My personal advice is, if there's one of these areas that you're struggling with and the Lord has called it to your attention, ask the Lord. Lord, I want to do your will. This is an area that I struggle with. Is this something that I need to change to be able to follow you more closely? Dina Pastor, do you have any thoughts on this?
Like you, I haven't explored this scientifically, but it seemed like the whole idea that we have an animal nature, where would we get that? I mean, weren't we created in the image of God? So I'm not sure where they're coming from. Maybe they mean something different. Maybe it's aggression, like you say. I have a feeling it has to do with sexuality. And is it true that John Henry Kellogg, he married a Seventh-day Baptist, and he had, I think, 22 children adopted, but he never
I think
sexually...
it was 41 or 42.
I didn't know what that meant, but that he never sexually consummated his marriage.
That I cannot validate whether or not he...
Have you heard something like that?
I have heard that.
But it seems as though he was very much against sexual intimacy, or either he didn't practice it, or he seemed to link the meat eating with tendency for, it would make you sexy.
One of his books was on his teachings on sex. And he wrote that book in 8 days. So I don't know how much research he had done, or if it was just off the top of his head.
Would you care to comment on either his views or Ellen White's on masturbation?
Well, I think they both harmonized in their views.
Essentially what
don't consider me an authority on everything, okay? No, actually, when I was in the Philippines at IAS, that's the Adventist International Institute of Advanced Studies. It's the General Conference School of Higher Education in the Philippines. And one class that I taught in the southern Philippines, because we had several off-campus programs, I taught this on the island of Mindanao, was in Biblical Principles of Health. And I think something like 90% of my students were pastors. And they were working on their MPH. And an assignment that I gave them, I selected a wide variety of topics that usually are a bit challenging for Seventh-day Adventists when it comes to health issues. And one of them was on Ellen White's comments on masturbation. And one of my students decided to write a paper on it. And I don't know if I still have it. I'm trying to clean up stuff that nobody's going to find any value in it when I'm gone. And I'm not sure I still have it, but I thought he did a fairly good job of giving a balanced view. Unfortunately, I don't remember exactly what he wrote in that paper. But let's put Ellen White in today's society. Would she be addressing issues of masturbation, or would her comments related to sexuality be more directed towards pornography?
Did she write a book of over 300 pages on the subject?
Ellen White?
Yes.
Not that I'm aware of.
I have a copy of it if you want to see it.
Yeah, is it available through the...
No, and I think someone gave it to me, and I've never read it, but I was surprised to find this book by Ellen White.
This is the first time I've heard of it.
Okay. I have a hard time finding it myself. But it just seems to me that she may have misunderstood it, and when she said that certain diseases were caused it's like more like syphilis symptoms rather than something that you could get from that practice.
You know, when she connects it with certain diseases, I find that challenging to see that being inspired. When she writes about it as being destructive in terms of our spiritual growth, that makes a lot of sense. Another thing that I would encourage you, when you come across things like this, and with this particular topic I haven't done it, go and try to read the context in which it was written. You know, much of what comes out of Revere and Herald and Pacific Press, and even what you get online today, is compilations. And so you have statements from here and from here and from there and from there, and oh, they're talking about the same subject. We'll put them together in a mismatch, and hopefully you get the concept of what she's saying. I have often found that if you read some of these statements in their context, you get a whole different picture of what she's trying to get across. And I'll give you an example. And I guess because this presentation hasn't been specifically on nutrition, it hasn't come up in the Q&A. But frequently when I give nutrition talks, the Bible and nutrition, not with non-Adventists, it's never come up with non-Adventists, but frequently I get it in an Adventist setting. And that is, what about eating fruits and vegetables together? I noticed at potluck we had fruits and vegetables together. And so one day I was tired of getting this question at virtually every Adventist nutrition seminar that I did. So I said, man, I got to come up with an answer. So I found the statement, it was in Counsels on Diet and Foods. But then it gave a reference. And so I went to the original reference. This statement came from a letter that she had written to a specific individual who was having digestive problems. And she said, you shouldn't be eating fruits and vegetables together. I have celiac disease. For those of you who don't know it, it means I will have an allergic reaction if I eat anything with gluten in it. So no wheat, no rye, no barley. There were some dishes at potluck. I saw them for myself. They had gluten in them. Any of you eat them? And I imagine those of you who ate them are not having any reactions. A couple years ago, I decided I was going to indulge because before I found out I had celiac, wheat-based products were my go-to food. And a couple years ago, I was at a restaurant and I said, man, there's a dish here that I really used to enjoy. I haven't had it for years. I'm sure the celiac has been eliminated from my body because a couple years ago I had a test that came back negative. Whew, did I pay a price? Did I pay a price? So, does that mean I should get up here and say, none of you should eat bread, none of you should eat spaghetti, none of you should eat crackers, you'll get sick? But if Ellen White were writing a letter to me, and she was trying to encourage me to improve my health, she'd say, don't eat food with gluten in it at your meals. Okay? That statement on fruits and vegetables, a specific statement to a specific individual who is having a specific health problem, and the compilers of Counsels on Diet and Food says, oh, here's one we need to interject. Don't eat fruits and vegetables together. Speaking along that line, I'll tell you another personal experience. Before I was diagnosed with celiac, I used to get really bad heartburn. And the worst was if I ate watermelon with a meal. I could eat watermelon by itself, but not with a meal. And if I really wasn't careful, if I ate watermelon with a spaghetti meal, oh man, that was agony for a few hours. Then I found out I had celiac, and so stopped eating all these wheat products. And all of a sudden one day, I don't know, was at a picnic or something, I had some watermelon. And then, didn't bother me any. Next time I ate watermelon with a meal, it didn't bother me any. I can eat watermelon and spaghetti together, no problem. So there was something with that gluten that was interfering with my ability to properly process certain foods. And I like to think that that was the situation with this person who was eating fruits and vegetables together, and for some reason his digestive system couldn't handle it.
Any other questions?
Oh, and by the way, I did have fruits and vegetables together at the potluck. And so far I haven't suffered any side effects. There's a question back here.
I just had one question. You were talking about a book, it's called The Great Something Advent, and the author.
Oh, yes.
I just want to write this down. Thank you very much.
By the way, speaking of books, I'll have some of these available next Sabbath. After you give these presentations enough times, people begin asking, do you have anything in writing? And my answer was no. Well, finally I put something in writing. There's much more in here than I can give in 2 Sabbaths. And we'll let you know how you can get it if you're interested next week.
I'd like to thank Dr. Andress for coming. It's been very informative, and he'll be back next week. His sermon title will be, All We Get to Eat is Manna, Yuck. And then the afternoon will be Out of the Ashes for the first half, and The Spirit of Caleb for the second. He will conclude with a tribute to Huldah Crooks, oldest person to climb Mount Whitney and oldest woman to climb Mount Fuji in Japan, both at the age of 91. And Dr. Andress is the only person to have been with her on both of those climbs. So we'll hear more about that next Sabbath. You don't want to miss that. Please bring a friend or an enemy or someone. and we have a little thank you for you for this week. And
It's been my joy.
let's bow our heads for prayer. I'll announce next week the person who's coming in June, but you won't want to miss that as well. That'll be really, really good. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for what we've heard today. Hopefully we'll have something from one of these presentations that will help us to live a happier, healthier life. We pray that you will just, for each person here and for our whole congregation, that you will open the storehouse of heaven, pour us out a blessing so big that we cannot receive it. And I pray, dear God, that we in our own lives can make a big difference for someone else. Please be in the interruption in our lives. Help us to meet people that we can talk to, share with, and bring them into our beautiful experience here in Hesperia. Bless us as we go our separate ways. Be with Dr. Andress. Protect him as he goes back down the hill and comes back next week. Thank you for hearing this prayer and answering according to your great will and purpose. In Jesus' name, amen.